Hi, this is Christopher Perrin, and welcome to this session on the good teacher being a good teacher. The good teacher, a good model, and a good pedagogue is the title for this session. Can you call to mind a good teacher or two that you've had? You might not be able to recall a lot of what that good teacher actually imparted to you in terms of information. Perhaps it's there, and you can think about this and say, yes, I did learn some important skills and facts and ideas from this person, but I bet as you recall this teacher, you're also thinking of this teacher as a model human being that you desired to emulate. You wanted to be like this person. Something good and beautiful embodied in a person is attractive and calls us to do the same or be the same. So this is a key distinction. A good teacher is good in two senses. A good teacher is a good human being first, and a good pedagogue second. In fact, the Greeks had this phrase, kalos kai agathos. Kalos could mean good, but it also could mean beautiful. It can mean something a beautiful form, something morally good, and also good to see. And then agathos meant to be practically good, to be skilled. So two words for good, kalos, agathos. We want to be beautiful and good. We want to be morally good. We want to be also good at the craft of teaching. Here is a definition of principle, just to go to this again. We talked about this just in the first opening session, but a principle is a first thing that describes a given natural reality, something always true of the cosmos and human experience. The principles in this course pertain to reality and in general, and education in particular. In other words, if we've done our job right, the principles that we're going to be discussing and presenting are true of the cosmos. They're true of human experience generally, but then therefore they also apply to teaching. By employing them, teachers will naturally cultivate virtue in the lives of their students, and the result is the full formation of human beings. Now, it's often been said that the big purpose and goal of education is the formation of a human soul. Sometimes this was called in Latin humanitas. That was a word for education. There was also educatio and eruditio and lots of other words, instructio, but humanitas was this great overarching goal of the educational enterprise, to raise up a child, grow up that child, mature that child, cultivate that child like a tree until it was full of the fruit of human excellence or virtue. So it's formation. Education is the formation of a child into a mature adult who's full of the fruit of virtue. This is a great principle, a first thing that we must keep in mind as we engage in the art of teaching. So, maybe in your career at some point, you wanted to just go be with a good teacher. Maybe you studied, say, the guitar, and you heard that in town there was a really great, good guitar teacher, and you wanted to be with that person. You wanted to learn from that person. Well, this has been true kind of history, that students, when they wanted to get a good education, would ask, whom should I study with? Whom should I be with? It's reported that one great thinker named Gregory wanted to study with Origen, and he said, I want to have fellowship with that man. So he traveled to Alexandria to study with Origen. It used to be that people would go not so much to an institution to study, but to a person, a good teacher. Well, anybody who's engaging in the art of teaching knows that there are some fundamental principles that apply as time goes by. Let's use carpentry as kind of an analogy. If you are a carpenter, there are some fundamental principles that apply to carpentry. And we could say, well, you might know, measure twice, cut once. You want to measure well in order to be a good carpenter, or you will waste your time. How many times have I gone to the store for another 2x4 because I cut it too short because I did not measure it properly? But there's another principle that the carpenter employs. This one's often unspoken, but it's this. don't start with the roof. Well, this is so obvious that it doesn't need to be stated. But the carpenter does start with the roof in mind. He will scaffold up from a foundation and then put on a roof. And such is the case with teaching. We are scaffolding, if you will. But what is the roof by analogy for the teacher but the full formation of the student? So even when we're teaching a first grader or a second grader, we ought to be thinking about a fully grown, cultivated tree bearing the fruit of wisdom and virtue. And of course, the carpenter is thinking about getting the right material for the job and using the right tool for the job. And a carpenter might have in his toolbox some 30 tools. But because if he's been trained well, hopefully by a good carpenter, he will know what tool to pull out of that toolbox at various times. And he won't need somebody to tell him what to do. He will have learned that he needs a hammer, and not just any hammer, but a framing hammer, this particular kind of hammer, and maybe at some point the funnest hammer to use is a sledgehammer when you're doing demolition. But the carpenter needs to know what tool to use and when. How does he know? How does he learn that? How does a teacher know what particular strategy or technique to employ in a given situation? That takes training. It takes being with somebody who knows the art, who can show you what the tools are and enable you to learn how to know when to use a particular tool. Teaching, therefore, is not a science. I know some of you have a degree in science, and it's a BS, a Bachelor of Science, but it's not a science. It's informed by science. Of course, science is practical and helpful in anything that we do because it's a study of how things work in the natural world. And we do study humans. Humans do exist in the natural world. But it's not a science, although informed by science. And let me bring to mind Gilbert Hyatt, who wrote in the 1950s about this when he was witnessing increasingly popular claims by progressive educators that teaching should be a science. He challenged that thesis in his book, The Art of Teaching, and he writes this near the introduction: "Teaching is not a science. It is an art. The instinctive, dynamic, and unpredictable elements in teaching make it far more like an art than a science. Science is precise, predictable, and follows laws that can be tested and measured. But teaching involves the interaction of personalities, other human beings, the inspiration of the teacher, and the active participation of the student, which cannot be reduced to a set of fixed rules." So in this course, we will present principles, but not a set of fixed rules, because we're dealing with human beings. After all, the student always has a vote when it comes to whether teaching will really occur or learning will really occur. The student must be an active participant, because teaching is a cooperative art. And so teaching is an art, although it's informed by science, but it's a cooperative art. And because it's cooperative, this means that there's some persuasion involved and some modeling involved. How is it that teacher can persuade, compel a student to love something that's true, good, and beautiful and want to learn an art or a skill, whether it be physics or poetry? Well, one thing that is clear: the teacher, if the teacher is going to inspire a student to learn, the teacher himself must be always an ongoing, ardent student. In fact, we could say that a teacher is just a more mature student, and perhaps a student is just an immature teacher. Well, why? It's because even the word student and the etymology of this word gives us some insight. It's from the Latin word studium, which means zeal or hunger, fondness, affection for something, for knowledge. So if you are truly a student, then you do study. So a teacher who no longer studies, a teacher who is no longer learning, is really not a teacher. Because the teacher is to be a model of learning and a muse and an inspirer of ongoing discovery, wonder, and learning. So The teacher, therefore, is good in this sense. The teacher says, essentially, as he stands before the class, do as I do, be as I am, love what I love. And so then virtue, or human capacity and excellence, is something that is modeled and not so much taught in any kind of direct model or method, but it's caught. So maybe you've heard these words from Christ when he said, can the blind lead the blind? Will they both not fall into a pit? But when a student has been fully trained, he will be like his teacher. So if you've been fully trained, you've become like your teacher. And this can be good or it can be bad. Because if you've had poor teachers who really weren't ongoing students themselves, well, then maybe you just were kind of forced to go through certain steps by either the threat of bad grades or the reward of good grades. But what you learned was not learned permanently. You still got A's in your courses, but you really didn't grow in knowledge. You've become like your teacher. If you've been fully trained, you've become like your teachers. And hopefully you've had good teachers too. And to some degree, you've become like them. Usually we're a mix. So how will a student grow in virtue? Well, essentially by following the model and the lead of his teacher. So this means a teacher must model virtue. This is just the principle of principles. If you want your students to be virtuous human beings, seek to be virtuous. Seek to be good yourself. Model virtue. We might say, be a good person, then concern yourself with good pedagogy. So when we've titled this course, The Good Teacher, we're thinking of good in two ways. To be a good, virtuous person, in front of your students a model, this is primary. And then secondarily, to be good at the art of teaching. To be good in both of these ways. Quintilian, the Roman educator and orator, said that a good orator was a good man. We might just stop there for a moment. He said a good orator was a good man. Before he uttered a word, he first was a good man. But then he went on to say, a good man speaking well. So this idea is ancient. We see it in Christ. We see it in Quintilian. The student will be like the teacher. And it's so important that the teacher be a virtuous person. Now, in the Christian tradition, we might also add a pious or holy person. Virtue and piety, virtue and holiness. But the modeling of the teacher is so critically important. It's perhaps the principle of principles. And in the classical tradition of education, we don't just teach a soul or a person, but we lead a soul. We give direction and we ask students to follow us, even as we have followed our good teachers in the past. So there's pedagogy, which means to lead a child. Paidos in Greek means child, and agein means to lead. So pedagogy, kind of etymologically speaking, means you were leading a child. Follow me, we're saying. But there's another word, psychogogia, which means to lead a soul. We're attempting to unfold and mature a soul, if you believe humans have a soul. And so this takes us to anthropology. What do you believe a human being is? Because this is essential to being a good teacher. It's to know what that girl or boy, young man or woman is that's in front of you. What is a human being? And this, of course, relates to virtue, because virtue means to come into your own as a human being, being able to do what only human beings can do, using human capacities to their fullest extent, as much as is possible for any given student. So, in other words, what is your anthropology? It sounds like a big word, but your view of humanity will guide and lead and perhaps govern your pedagogy. I like the way James K.A. Smith, the philosopher, put it. He says, every pedagogy assumes an anthropology. Show me how you teach, and I will be able to discern what you believe a human being is. So, we in the classical tradition have a classical anthropology, no surprise. And it involves at least this, that human beings are souls as well as bodies. We are body-soul unities, and therefore we are involved in pedagogy, but also psychagogy. We're leading and unfolding a human soul. And this will affect and govern the way we teach. If you believe that the child before you has a soul, has a mind, if you believe that truth exists and that we have a mind that can know, can discover and know truth, well, you are adhering to a classic anthropology, and it will govern the way you teach. So that's perhaps worth some of you thinking about. What is your anthropology? Does truth exist? Can it be known? Can we know the truth? Can we love the beautiful? Can we do the good? If so, you'll teach accordingly. Now, virtue comes from a Latin word vir. Vir simply means man. And so virtus, or virtue, has to do with a vir, a man, coming into his own, becoming the fullest, best version of himself, acquiring excellence in all those dimensions of being a human being. And that means using words, it means using numbers, it means cooking, it means sailing a ship, it means excellence of all kinds. This is virtue. So we use the word virtue kind of generically to describe a whole collection of particular virtues. We have this word virtuoso. We've taken from Latin to the Italian, and it means somebody who's really good at what they do, like a virtuoso pianist. It means being about as good as a human being, or that particular human being can be, having been trained and coached at the art of playing piano. So virtue, and it's, of course, even though vir means man, virtue is for any human being, male or female. Excellence. To grow in virtue, then, is to grow as a human being, to learn and do what humans do, and to do those things with excellence. And in the tradition of virtue, there are a number of different ways of classifying collections of virtues. For example, there are the cardinal virtues or the moral virtues. And cardinal comes from a word which means hinge, cardinus in Latin means hinge. These virtues were so key, regarded as so key and important, that your life kind of revolved around them. So if you had these four master virtues, it would pull lots of other virtues along with them. And here they were, described this way for centuries: prudence, seeing what is real and knowing what to do in various circumstances; justice, after seeing what is real; giving to each person what is due to each person, his or her due. That would be justice. Temperance, after seeing what is real in the cosmos, curbing our passions and appetites, those things that would prevent us from engaging in just action. And then the last one, courage or fortitude, after seeing what is real, overcoming threats and suffering, if necessary, to endure what is needed to engage in just action. These four master virtues would be often expressed in other areas of human enterprise and experience. For example, in the life of a student. And so there was a set of virtues classified in various ways, different kinds of listings. There's no one master list for these academic or intellectual virtues, but they were often talked about as what it meant for a person to be excellent as a student. And no surprise, some of the cardinal virtues appear. For example, temperance certainly occurs as an intellectual virtue as well. But here's a list of some of the great intellectual virtues: love and wonder, gratitude to be in the world in a spirit of wonder and admiration in the cosmos; studium, or zeal and inquisitiveness, a zeal and thirst to know and understand, a healthy spirit of curiosity about the world and how it works; humility or docility, a recognition of one's ignorance and a willingness and a desire to be taught by those who know more than we do; diligence and constancy, a love-compelled study that stays on task and resists distraction; attentiveness, propelled by a thirst to know something true, good, and beautiful. The mind stretches out to grasp and to possess. There's a kind of tension, something being pulled as we stretch forward to know; and discipline and thoroughness, which is a disposition and habit to work carefully all the way to the end, to a conclusion. There was courage and tenacity, and of course courage is one of the cardinal virtues as well. the disposition to face academic challenges or difficulties that may at first be daunting, and then to overcome them with perseverance and necessary help. Temperance, one of the cardinal virtues that appears here. Moderated, prudent use of time and energy to do academic work, neither understudying nor overstudying. And then lastly, responsibility, the disposition that realizes that all deep learning must be done by the student. Again, teaching is a cooperative art, a participatory art. The student must participate. The student must decide to learn for herself and cooperate with her teacher. Responsibility. Okay, so we've looked at these key cardinal virtues. We've looked at some of these academic virtues, and you'll see these coming up throughout the rest of the course. But let's just finish out a brief survey of virtue in general and look at civic virtues. And I'll be a little quicker here, but there's prudence in making informed decisions when you're living in a town, to make sure that civic circumstances are addressed properly and with insight. There's justice or fairness in dealing with others, sharing resources, and respecting the rights of others. Civis means citizen, and civitas meant town. So to be civil meant to be living with your fellow citizens properly and well. Temperance, we need that when we're living with one another in a town or city. Moderation of desires, actions, and consumption of resources. Courage and fortitude, standing up for the rights of others, doing what is right for the good of others. Responsibility or accountability, maintaining one's commitments and property. Staying informed. Civic-mindedness is showing concern for other citizens and taking action for the common good. Honesty, exhibiting truthfulness and reliability in dealing with others, especially in commerce. Care, showing concern for the welfare of neighbors and other citizens. Loyalty, showing fidelity and commitment to the work and welfare of the community. These are civic virtues. So now we've looked at 3 classes of virtues already that we sometimes can, classify as virtue in the kind of the highest overarching sense. But there were also physical virtues: speed, swiftness, strength, endurance, agility, coordination, grace, health. And we know that in education, a healthy body that is self-governed and strong does actually bear upon how that student learns mentally and intellectually. There's a relationship between body and mind. And while this won't be the focus of our course, we just need to acknowledge that a healthy body is also important to learning. A sound mind and a sound body was the old maxim. And then we'll conclude just by noting that there are also theological virtues or spiritual virtues, especially in the Christian tradition. And they were faith, hope, and love. So if you're in the Christian tradition, faith is that virtue that connects us to God, assents to and trust in his revealed truth and promises in Scripture. And hope is seeing past present circumstances, no matter how difficult. And this virtue desires and expects the blessedness and happiness of life that is within and from God. And then love. Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 says there's faith, hope, and love remain, but the greatest of these is love. So in the Christian tradition, love is the master of all virtues. This virtue unites oneself with the love of God and participates in that love, animating all activity and action. Growing in love, this virtue gives power and effectiveness to all other virtues. So, we think that the principles that we're going to articulate in this course will lead students and teachers to see that we are seeking after and growing towards virtue. Certainly the academic virtues, but the moral virtues, and in the Christian tradition, faith, hope, and love as well. That this is the master goal that we're seeking. This is the roof that we are keeping in mind even when we start teaching children when they're 4 and 5 years old. Now, the principles in this course, just like these virtues, are all kind of in an interactive, interdependent relationship with one another. You can separate them for the purpose of analysis, but they exist together in a kind of ecosystem or web. And this is true of any principle, any great human principle is already in an ecosystem and an interaction with other principles. And so as we present to you these principles, just remember that they can kind of overlap. Sometimes one teaching practice will be the incarnation of 3 or 4 of these principles at the same time. And if you look at the icon wheel that we've created for the book and for this course, you'll see there are 10 icons or images, each used to describe one of the 10 principles. And then you'll see another diagram, basically lines going from each principle to every other one. The 10 principles are, and I'll introduce them to you now. We'll give you kind of a very brief overview now, and then throughout the course, your understanding of them will continue to be layered and to deepen. Festina lente, the first one, means make haste slowly. The Latin festina means hurry up. Lente means slowly. Make haste slowly. Multum non multa means much, not many. It's better to study a few things really well than to do a superficial covering of things that students will just forget. Repetitio mater memoriae means repetition is the mother of memory. We continue to come back to things that are key and important and essential to ensure mastery and to deepen our understanding and the relationship of any idea or skill. Songs, chants, and jingle, the fourth principle, means that especially with younger children, but even older ones, we sing in order to experience delight and make connections. And we sing because we are embodied beings who love to sing, and that singing will actually be another way in which we deepen our understanding and also experience delight in learning. Wonder and curiosity is that principle of just gazing and then being at wonder in a cosmos that exists before us and that is beautiful and mysterious, and that calls forth our attention. We need to cultivate wonder and curiosity, a healthy curiosity. Scholé and contemplation is a disposition and an atmosphere that provides opportunities to gaze and be at wonder, and to have conversation, to explore and deepen our understanding of anything or any skill that's before us. Embodied learning is a principle of recognizing that our bodies are instruments by which we come to know and understand anything, and even to delight. There's 2 aspects to this, the liturgical and the poetic, which we will unpack for you. Then there's the 8th principle, docendo discimus, which simply means by teaching we learn. This principle states that if you really want to learn something deeply, teach it to someone else. Give it away, and then you'll find that you permanently possess it. And number 9 is optimus magister bonus liber est. The best teacher is a good book. And this simply means that as well as human teachers that are around us and living, we want those teachers who have gone before us, who live in books, to also be a part of the conversation and also be our tutors and teachers. And if we can find the very best ones, all the better for students and teachers. And then finally, there's conversation and friendship. That all teaching, from one perspective, is an ongoing conversation with the more mature student, the teacher, with less mature teachers, the students, growing together, impacting one another, sharing with one another, and actually teaching one another in sympathy and fellowship. So these 10 principles are the principles we'll introduce to you, and they exist, as I've said, in a kind of ecosystem where they're all in interaction with one another, and they become the first things that enable us to know what to do in any teaching situation. So we'll be breathing. We're kind of starting whole and going to parts, but any part can lead us to the whole. And so much teaching is this way. It's both general and specific. We can start with something large like a principle leading us to particular teaching practices, and we can start with particular teaching practices that will lead us to principles that inform the whole. And such is life. We breathe. We grow this way by looking at the whole, looking at the part, and back again.